to Vietnam or so, why? Well, because that's a way of innovating. It's shipping the capital where labor is cheap, right? Schumpeter was smart. He pointed out that there was a form of innovation, finding new factors of production and new places where to produce and sell, new markets. Obviously, it's an innovation, right? From an economic point of view, that's an innovation. Right? It's not only completely new technology from the scientific point of view that is the innovation. You know, for lots of foreign enterprises and for the Chinese one, it was an innovation to start producing. You know, Deng Xiaoping was an innovator because he changed some technologies. The technology that provided people with incentive to do things or not. Right? If one wants to understand, and from that point of view, he didn't do anything particularly original. He copied, by the way. With all the respect I'm sure you have for your former president, you know, what the guy did was copy. He copied and adapted a certain set of rules to a particular set of factors. And then, you know, more copies were made. All right. Now, there is one observation that people make, which is, well, fine. But one thing is true. Some ideas, at least some prototype, are to a serious extent very costly to produce. And the first unit is costly. And so you cannot treat that, right? This is a claim you hear frequently. You cannot treat that as normal production. Right? So the argument is you can make so many shoes of the same type, right? That essentially there is divisibility. But to make the very first copy of a movie, it's very expensive. And instead making the second, the third, the fourth, especially with modern technology, is much cheaper. Right? Well, that's true. But you want us to be careful also in that. So first of all, notice case of movies and other things. Yes, it is expensive to make the first master copy of a CD or so on. But it's a lot less expensive now than it used to be. So in fact, the fixed cost of making the first copy has decreased, probably as much as the cost of reproduction. In the old days, making copies was quite expensive, so no many were made. Certainly was always a factor or two or three less than making the original. Very good. But on the other hand, think about the production of bread or shoes or any of those consumption goods that we think are old, mature, right? Well, making the factory in any case has a huge fixed cost. It's true, out of a factory you can make 1 million pair of jeans a year. But the factory has a huge fixed cost. Nevertheless, nobody says, oh my God, that factory has a high fixed cost. We have to restrict competition in the blue jeans market and gives these guys some monopoly power, because otherwise he would not build the factory, because he needs the monopoly power to recover rents that will allow the payment of the fixed cost of the factory. Right? Have you ever heard somebody say that? I have never heard somebody say that. This is even true by cars. I mean, now we know that a prototype of a new car, where for a prototype means designing a new car and starting production and setting up the assembly plant, costs a fortune. You know, it's in the order of the billions of dollars. But nobody says, oh, let's restrict competition in the car industry and give monopoly power to Hyundai or Toyota or whatever you want, okay? So that they can actually pay the gigantic fixed cost for the new model. Right? Isn't that fun? Still, we tend to think that we should do that with prototypes of ideas. We think that in the case of ideas and innovation in general, this fixed cost cannot be recovered if we don't provide the original innovator with at least temporary, but not so temporary, form of monopoly power, market restriction. My leg is hurting. I invite you to think about this. I invite you to think about this. You know why? Because in fact, traditional microeconomic theory, traditional industrial organization, has always had this problem very clear. And if you go read the Principle of Economics of Marshall, you will find that discussion very clear. And there is nothing about competition that makes it impossible to pay for fixed costs. Nothing. In fact, you all took intermediate micro, right? You're all doing a PhD, so I'm sure you all took. You remember the cost curves? Do they still teach cost curves in China?
Yeah.
Very good, because they have forgotten cost curve in the Western world. You remember the theory, the competitive theory of an industry? Variable cost, fixed cost, right? Decreasing marginal cost, increasing long run equilibrium. You remember how I worked? I'll tell you how I worked. It worked like that, right? It's a partial equilibrium thing. The way it should be, actually, if you study seriously specific innovation. There's no such a thing as the aggregate innovation. Right? Macroeconomists like to say the aggregate innovation because, okay, we want to have a simple model to talk about GMP, but in fact, actual innovation are one at a time, very small and decentralized. So we talk about a specific industry. The specific industry is typically defined by some potential demand function, right? At which some good that has not yet been produced, but there is a potential demand. For example, the smartphone. There is a potential demand for the smartphone, which is a partial substitute of the old phone. So one says at that point, well, you see, there's never perfect competition because it's an imperfect substitute. Absolutely. The issue here is, what do I gain by stressing the imperfect competition aspect of it? Do I gain something? If I don't, why do I need an extra assumption? Even bread is always substitute for something, but we're not particularly concerned about monopolistic competition in the bread market. And the fact that bread may be a substitute of rice, and rice may be a substitute of breadsticks, right? It's okay, you know, yeah, there's a little bit of a local monopoly power, but don't care very much. So I'm not sure that in order to understand what happened to the smartphone market, the key thing was the monopolistic competition between the first guys and Nokia and Motorola. My impression is that the thing that mattered was the competition among the guys that made the smartphones. And so how does it work? It works like this, that at certain point, somebody using existing capital and at a certain cost, okay, capital of type I, right, produces some initial stock of capital of type I plus 1. That's the first factory for an iPhone 1. It is a certain amount of productive capacity. With a certain number of workers, certain number of engineers, certain number of marketing guys, certain number of shipping guys, certain number of guys at the phone answering the customer says, what do I do? You know, where do I push? I don't understand the software. Why are the funny things? Where are the buttons? Okay? Point is that at the beginning, after the costly thing, the cost F, that's the fixed cost, from existing resources, Apple Incorporated set up the first plant, where plant means actually a whole organization in the United States and then worldwide, to produce the first smartphone. And once they paid all that, they could produce and ship smartphone. I'm trying to go too fast and I'm eating my words. They could produce smartphone, units of smartphone, at a fixed marginal cost. I'm going to make it fixed, but it doesn't really matter. It could be increasing. Who cares? Okay? So there was a fixed marginal cost of producing the phone. Right? The point is, how many could they produce? They could produce that much. Was determined by that. So there was Q0 here, and that was initial capacity. Now, here comes the industrial organization guy and says, oh, wait a second, Baldwin, you're just cheating. Because the choice of Q0 was part of a very sophisticated process through which Apple said, well, I am a non-perfect substitute for the Nokia phones. The Nokia phone sells at 300, all right? My calculation, my degree of substitutability for the Nokia phone or the Ericsson phone or the Motorola, well, Motorola was already dead, I think. Or actually, BlackBerry was the competitor there. Now that I think of it, yeah, BlackBerry is such and such. So if I want to have that capacity, I have that price. If I have less capacity, that I choose this in order to maximize my rent. Absolutely, no doubt, no doubt, no doubt. This is true every time, even when I open a restaurant. Right? Perfect competition in the sense of the idealized perfect competition of homogeneous good does not exist, and nobody is so stupid to ever have claimed that we ever lived in a world of perfect competition. In some sense, not even in financial markets that are very deep and anonymous and blah, 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 there is perfect competition. You might even, to a certain extent, if you're a big guy, certainly if you're the Fed, identify what your impact on the price is. So, yeah, maybe Young and I don't know, maybe Young is super rich, are marginal competitive guy and price taker in the financial market. Lots of players are not. They know they can move prices around. Sometimes by reputation, by signaling that they are doing the trade. Yes. When we do modeling, we say, is the fact that this was calculated with a sophisticated aspect of, with a sophisticated series of exercise so that they knew that they would have extracted this P0 by doing all the monopolistic competition with Nokia. Key to the understanding of the innovation process or not? My argument, which I would be happy to give in practical, is no. Because while this was a gigantic innovation, millions of little innovations that take place daily don't go through that. And the big innovation, you remember, the one I was describing before by traveling like that, this little sequence of things that takes us from one technology to another one that is well identified, all these millions of little innovations are essentially competitive ones. At each step, people notice very little how they're perturbing it. I'm thinking at the evolution of motorbikes or bikes, things I know. Right? If I think at the bike I was riding this summer, or a Pinarello super duper bike, and I compare to what I used to ride in the mountains 50 years ago, my God, I'm so old. The distance is gigantic, but it's a distance that has accumulated by a lot of small producers of bike over time, and none of them went through all the calculation, monopolistic competition. They just went, I kind of do that thing, that makes me competitive, I have this extra thing, and I'm gonna get that. Right? And yes, they're not identical. Some bike producers have more prestige and status than others, but they're all aligned along price quality lines. And, and this is true for lots of stuff. Anyhow, I'm perfectly happy to let people think about this calculation due to monopolistic competition. I don't think it's very relevant. The point is what? The point is that if this guy behaves competitively, as I'm letting him do, he gets a quantity and a price. And these are rents. These are competitive rents. There accrues to the first entrant, but notice, it could be simultaneous invention. Could be 2 first entrants, 3 first entrants. The point is that the 3 first entrants will have a limited capacity. And if they're not suicidal, they will all choose in equilibrium a capacity that allows them to earn some rent. And to the extent that they're not imitating, you see that here, the fact that ideas are not free goods is relevant. To the extent that they're not imitated instantaneously, those rents last over time. Now people say, oh, but that's just an empirical matter. Yeah, well, growth is an empirical matter. Sure. It happens to be an empirical feature of the universe that it takes time to build capacity. Wow. It takes time to build another Volkswagen plant. It takes time to build another pharmaceutical plant. It takes time even to distribute music. It takes a server to make illegal copies of a music. Even in the cheapest and easiest to reproduce thing, it takes something. Time and resources. Which means, when now I say that with my reproduction technology, remember I wrote it before, now I go from period 0 where there is this to period 1 where there is this capacity, because there is more capacity. This capacity may come from the same producer, the same 3 innovators or 4 innovators or 2 innovators extending their physical capacity. Right? Now they're here, and so they're going there. It may come from you imitating, that is going on the market for the new plant, for the new technology, purchasing it at a cost lower than the one I paid before. I paid F, maybe you pay epsilon F, where epsilon is the number less than 1. Okay? But the point is that there is more capacity due to imitation. And once there is more capacity, then the price goes down. But there is a little bit of rent too in general. Right? And as long as this rent, let's call it R1 and call it R0. Now, how much will go to the innovator? Well, the innovator will get its share of R0 plus the discounted value of its share of R1 and so on. So the innovator will innovate if F is less than the share of rents, call them a share of the innovator alpha of rents at time t, right? The share alpha discounted with the appropriate discount factor. You see? These are the total rents in each period. This is the share that goes to the innovator. Let's just pretend it's constant. You can put, it may depend on t. You may get a big share the first period, a smaller share the second, and a very small share the third. Right? I mean, the rents that now Apple gets from the iPhone market are a small share of the total rents. They're not even the dominant, in terms of quantity, they're not the dominant player, but they got a big share the first period. But they keep getting rents. Right? So that's the rent of period t. That's the discount factor, whatever discount factor they have, right? And that's the number of periods they stay on the market. Okay? Eventually, the last innovator will come in, or sorry, the last imitator will come in, or long-run capacity will stop here. Where? When the rents, that is the difference between the price per unit and the marginal cost per unit multiplying the quantity, right? These are the rents. Oh, damn it. Right? Just covered the fixed cost of the last entrant. That's what we learned from Marshall 150 years ago. Well, almost. 150 almost. Right? So we have this theory. This is the theory of innovation in a competitive market. It's 150 years old. To me, it works perfectly well. I think if I look around, right, it works perfectly well. If I think of Zara innovating over Benetton and H&M and whatever, this is it. No? Zara finds a certain way of organizing the production process, distributing, right, the copying, designing, set up a certain number of stores worldwide. You know, the other guy says, oh, wow, look at this guy, we'll do it too. And then it becomes a worldwide entry of this and that and H&M and blah, blah, blah. And the Benetton stays behind, for example. They were the leader. They are unable to acquire the new car. They are unable to imitate. Nobody has forbidden the Benetton from imitating Zara. They could have imitated. They were not able to. Other companies have come in. Millions of little companies have come in with lots of names. And now they all try to do what Zara did. Well, the guys in that little town north there of Spain, northwest of Spain, are particularly good, and they keep being the leader. Good. They're earning rents, but they're being imitated like crazy. And the funny thing is that they also imitate, because they're actually terrible imitators and copies of all the top designers. All the big fashion designers know that a month or two after that something new has come out, Zara will make copies of some of that and sell it at a 10th of the price or a 20th of the price worldwide. Works like this to me. Right? I'm pricing things intentionally. I'm pricing things competitively. You see, the short run supply curves are even vertical. I'm just assuming people just go to capacity. They don't play any game of